The scars on Catherine Wagner's face told a story no one in Yosemite, California wanted to hear, which made their pitying glances all the more unbearable as she walked through the dusty Main Street on that sweltering July afternoon in 1878. The fire that had taken her family had left its mark 3 years ago, twisting the right side of her face into a landscape of pink and white ridges that made children stare and women whisper behind their gloved hands. Catherine had learned to hold her head high anyway, even when the mercantile owner's wife clutched her daughter closer as Catherine passed, even when the banker looked everywhere but at her when she came to withdraw what little money she had left. She was 22 years old and utterly alone in a world that seemed to think loneliness was the only fitting companion for someone who looked like her. The general store was mercifully empty when she entered, the bell above the door announcing her arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt at odds with the immediate shift in atmosphere. Mr. Henderson, the proprietor, glanced up from his ledger, and his expression softened into that familiar, stomach-turning sympathy that Catherine had come to despise. "Miss Wagner," he said, his voice gentle in that particular way people used when they thought you might shatter at any moment. "What can I do for you today?" "I need flour, sugar, and coffee," Catherine said, keeping her voice level and professional. She had learned not to show how their pity cut her. "And I will need it on credit until next month. My sewing should bring in enough by then." Mr. Henderson's face creased with concern. "Miss Wagner, your account is already quite extended. I do not know if I understand," Catherine interrupted, fighting to keep the desperation from her voice. "I will have the money. I have 3 dresses commissioned and Mrs. Patterson promised to pay in advance for her daughter's wedding gown." The truth was that Mrs. Patterson had promised no such thing, but Catherine could not bear another conversation about her unfortunate circumstances, about how tragic it was that such a promising young woman had been reduced to scraping by on needlework in a tiny cabin on the outskirts of town. Before the fire, her father had been a successful rancher. Before the fire, she had been engaged to Thomas Brennan, the most eligible bachelor in Yosemite. Before the fire, her life had held promise and possibility. After the fire, Thomas had visited her once in the hospital, his face pale and stricken, and then never again. She heard 6 months later that he had married a girl from Sacramento. "Please, Mr. Henderson," Catherine said quietly, "I am not asking for charity, just time." The door opened behind her, bringing with it a gust of hot air and the jingle of spurs. Catherine did not turn around, too focused on Mr. Henderson's face as he wavered in his decision. She saw his eyes flick to whoever had entered, saw some calculation cross his features. "I am sorry, Miss Wagner, but I really cannot extend any more credit. Perhaps you could ask. I will pay for her supplies," a deep voice said from behind Catherine. "And clear her account." Catherine spun around, heat flooding her unscarred cheek. The man standing in the doorway was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that touched his collar. His eyes were a startling gray-green, like sage after rain, and they looked directly at her face without flinching, without that telltale pause on her scars, without pity. "I do not need your charity," Catherine said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. She had heard this offer before, usually from men who thought a scarred woman with no family should be grateful for any attention, even the kind that came with shameful expectations. "Good," the man said, "because I am not offering charity. I am offering a business arrangement." Catherine narrowed her eyes. "I do not understand." "I am William Tucker," he said, taking a few steps closer. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, and Catherine noticed the way his hand rested naturally near his hip, where a well-worn gun belt sat. I just bought the old Morrison ranch, and I need someone who can sew. My clothes are falling apart, I have no curtains, and I have no idea how to make this place livable. I will pay you to help me set up a proper household." "The Morrison ranch," Mr. Henderson interjected. "That place has been abandoned for 2 years. It is in terrible shape." "Which is why I need help," William said, but his eyes remained on Catherine. "I have money from selling my cattle in Montana. I am starting fresh here, and I would rather pay someone local than send away for goods that will take months to arrive." Catherine studied him carefully. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with the weathered appearance of a man who spent his life outdoors. There was no guile in his expression, no hidden smirk that suggested ulterior motives. But she had been wrong about people before. "I work from my home," Catherine said finally. "I do not make house calls." "Then I will bring the work to you," William replied without hesitation. "Fabric, measurements, whatever you need. You tell me what it costs, and I will pay you fairly for your time and skill." Mr. Henderson was watching this exchange with poorly concealed surprise. Catherine realized that William Tucker had just offered her exactly what she needed, a steady source of income, in front of a witness who would spread the news throughout town. If she refused, she would look foolish. If she accepted, she would have to trust a complete stranger. "Fine," she said, making her decision. "But I want half the payment up front." Something that might have been approval flickered in William's gray-green eyes. "Fair enough. Mr. Henderson, if you would be so kind as to total Miss Wagner's purchases along with clearing her existing debt, I will settle the account now. And add my own supplies to that. I need pretty much everything." As Mr. Henderson scurried to comply, Catherine found herself standing awkwardly next to this strange cowboy who had just upended her afternoon. She was hyper-aware of the careful distance he maintained, as if he understood that she needed space. "You did not have to do this," she said quietly. "I know," William replied, "but I do need the help and you clearly have the skills. Seems like it works out for both of us." There was no pity in his voice, no excessive gentleness. He spoke to her the way he might speak to any other business acquaintance, and Catherine felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen ever so slightly. Mr. Henderson returned with a lengthy tally, and Catherine watched in amazement as William counted out the money without hesitation. It was more than she had expected, enough to clear her 3-month debt and purchase her supplies with money left over. "I will come by your place tomorrow if that suits you," William said as they gathered their packages. "Where exactly do you live?" "The cabin past the creek, about a mile east of town," Catherine said. "The one with the blue door." "I will find it," William assured her. He tipped his hat, his eyes meeting hers directly once more. "Until tomorrow, Miss Wagner." Catherine watched him leave, his arms full of supplies, his stride confident and unhurried. Mr. Henderson was staring at her with a mixture of surprise and speculation. "Well," he said, "that was unexpected." "Yes," Catherine agreed, gathering her own purchases. "It was." The walk back to her cabin gave her time to think, to question whether she had just made a wise business decision or a terrible mistake. But when she arrived home and put away her supplies, looking around at the small, neat space that had been her sanctuary for 3 years, she felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. The next morning, Catherine woke early and set about making her cabin as presentable as possible. It was a fool's errand in some ways. The place was small and spare, with just a main room that served as kitchen and workroom, and a tiny bedroom barely large enough for her narrow bed. But it was clean, and her sewing area by the window was organized with spools of thread arranged by color and her precious sewing machine, a singer she had managed to save from the fire, positioned to catch the best light. She was pinning up her hair when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Through the window, she saw William Tucker driving a sturdy buckboard, a large sorrel horse tied to the back. He pulled up in front of her cabin and climbed down, and Catherine noticed he had cleaned up since yesterday. His shirt was a faded blue but freshly washed, and he had shaved. She opened the door before he could knock, and he smiled at her. It was a genuine smile, reaching his eyes, and again, Catherine was struck by the fact that he looked directly at her without any visible discomfort. "Morning, Miss Wagner," he said. "I brought some things for you to look at." He had indeed brought things. For the next hour, Catherine found herself examining shirts with missing buttons and torn seams, pants that needed hemming, a jacket with a ripped lining. But there were also bolts of fabric, more than she had expected, in sturdy cottons and even a few pieces of finer material. "I need work shirts, obviously," William explained as she examined a particularly worn garment. "But I also need curtains, tablecloths, maybe some dish towels. And I will need clothes suitable for town, for when I have to conduct business. I'm afraid I have been living rough for a while, and everything I own is falling apart." Catherine ran her fingers over a bolt of dark blue cotton. "This would make good curtains. How many windows do you have?" 8 in the main house," William said. "It is a decent-sized place, 4 rooms downstairs, 3 bedrooms upstairs. It needs work, but the bones are good." "That is a lot of windows," Catherine said, calculating in her head. "This will take time." "I am not in a hurry," William assured her. "Do what you can when you can. I trust you to price it fairly." They spent another hour discussing measurements and materials, and Catherine found herself relaxing despite her initial wariness. William was easy to talk to, asking her opinion on practical matters and listening carefully to her answers. He treated her like an expert, which she supposed she was, and there was none of the condescension she sometimes received from male customers who thought they knew better than she did about her own craft. "I should get measurements for your dress clothes," Catherine said finally, "if you want them to fit properly." "Of course," William said, standing up straighter. Catherine retrieved her measuring tape and approached him, trying to ignore the flutter of nervousness in her stomach. It had been years since she had been this close to a man, years since anyone had touched her with anything other than medical necessity. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached up to measure his shoulders. "You are shaking," William observed quietly. "If this makes you uncomfortable, I can go to a tailor in Sacramento." "No," Catherine said, forcing her hands steady. "I am fine. I just do not get many customers who need measuring anymore. Most people send their husbands to a tailor for this sort of thing." She stretched the tape across his broad shoulders, noting the measurements in her mind. He stood very still, and she was grateful that he did not try to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. When she moved to measure his chest, she had to step closer, close enough to smell the clean scent of soap and something else, leather and sage and sunshine. "You have a good setup here," William said, his voice carefully neutral as she worked. "That is a nice sewing machine." "It was my mother's," Catherine said. "One of the few things I managed to save." She felt him tense slightly under her hands, and she braced herself for the inevitable questions, the prying into her tragedy. But William simply said, "She must have been a skilled seamstress to own a machine like that." "She was," Catherine agreed, surprised by the lack of pushiness in his response. "She taught me everything I know." By the time she had finished taking his measurements, Catherine felt less nervous and more professional. This was just business, she reminded herself. A transaction that benefited them both. She wrote down the final numbers and calculated a fair price for everything they had discussed. "This is what I will need for materials and time," she said, showing him the figure. "Half now, half on delivery." William looked at the number and nodded. That seems reasonable, though I think you are undercharging for the curtains. That is a lot of work. Catherine blinked, surprised. Most customers tried to negotiate down, not up. This is the standard rate. Maybe for simple hemming, William said. But you will have to measure each window individually, cut and sew 8 sets of curtains, and probably make multiple trips to the ranch to check the fit. Your time is worth more than you are charging. Before Catherine could respond, he had added another $20 to the total and was counting out her deposit. She stared at the money, more than she usually made in a month, and felt her throat tighten with emotion she did not want to show. "Thank you," she managed to say. "You are welcome," William replied. "When do you think you might have the first batch of shirts ready? A week, perhaps less if I have no other orders come in." "No rush," he said again. He gathered up the clothes she was not repairing immediately and headed for the door, then paused. "Miss Wagner, I hope you do not mind me saying, but you have a real talent. I have been to plenty of seamstresses, and your work is exceptional." Catherine felt heat rise in her face. Compliments were rare these days, and she did not quite know how to respond. "I do my best. It shows," William said simply. He tipped his hat to her. "I will check back in a week or so if that is all right." "That would be fine." After he left, Catherine stood in her quiet cabin, the money in her hand, and allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. William Tucker was either genuinely kind or exceptionally good at hiding his true nature. Time would tell which. Over the next week, Catherine threw herself into her work with renewed energy. She repaired William's shirts with careful, tiny stitches, replacing buttons with ones she had carved herself from bone. She started on his new dress shirts, using a fine gray cotton that would look good with his coloring. And in the evenings, when the light was fading, she began cutting fabric for the curtains. The work was soothing in its familiarity, and it kept her from thinking too much about William Tucker, and the way his steady gaze had made her feel seen for the first time in years. She reminded herself that he was just a customer, that his kindness was probably born of practicality rather than any real interest in her as a person. Men like William Tucker, handsome cowboys with money and prospects, did not look twice at women like her. But when he returned 8 days later, driving his wagon up to her cabin in the late afternoon sun, Catherine could not stop the smile that crossed her face. "Miss Wagner," William greeted her, climbing down from the wagon. "I hope I am not disturbing you." "Not at all," Catherine said. "Your shirts are ready." She brought out the bundle of mended clothes and the 3 new shirts she had completed. William examined them carefully, running his fingers over the seams and buttonholes with an appreciative eye. "These are better than new," he said. "You are not exaggerating about your skill." "I am glad they meet your expectations," Catherine replied, pleased despite herself. "More than meet them," William assured her. He paid her the balance owed and then hesitated, as if considering whether to speak. "Miss Wagner, I was wondering if you might be willing to come out to the ranch to measure the windows. I know you said you work from home, but it would be more accurate than me trying to do it and probably getting it wrong." Catherine felt her old wariness return. Going to his ranch meant being alone with him, far from town, where no one would hear if she called for help. But as she looked at his open, honest face, she found it hard to believe he meant her any harm. "I could pay you extra for your time," William added, misinterpreting her hesitation. "And I promise you would be perfectly safe. My ranch hand, Miguel, and his wife, Rosa, are living in the old foreman's cottage. You would not be alone with me if that is a concern." The fact that he had addressed her worry directly, without making her voice it, decided her. "When would you like me to come? Would tomorrow suit you? I could pick you up in the morning and have you back before evening." "All right," Catherine agreed. "Tomorrow morning." That night, Catherine lay awake wondering what she was doing. She had spent 3 years avoiding situations exactly like this, keeping herself isolated and safe in her small cabin, where the world could not hurt her anymore. But something about William Tucker made her want to take the risk, made her want to believe that not everyone saw her as an object of pity or a cautionary tale. William arrived promptly at 9 the next morning, and Catherine was waiting with her measuring tape and notebook. The ride to the Morrison Ranch took about 45 minutes, and Catherine spent most of it looking at the passing landscape and trying not to be too aware of William's presence beside her on the wagon seat. "How long have you lived in Yosemite?" William asked, breaking the companionable silence. "All my life," Catherine replied. "My father built his ranch here when I was just a baby. This valley was barely settled then." "It is beautiful country," William observed. "I can see why people put down roots here. What made you leave Montana?" Catherine asked, then immediately worried she was being too forward, but William did not seem to mind the question. "My father died last year, and my older brother inherited the ranch. We did not exactly see eye to eye on how things should be run. Seemed simpler to sell my share and start fresh somewhere new." "I am sorry about your father," Catherine said. "Thank you. He was a good man, taught me everything I know about cattle and horses." William glanced at her. "What about your family? You mentioned your mother was a seamstress." Catherine felt her stomach tighten. She had known this question would come eventually, but she still was not prepared for it. "They died 3 years ago. There was a fire." "I am sorry," William said, and his voice held genuine sympathy without tipping over into pity. "That must have been terrible." "It was," Catherine said simply. She waited for the inevitable follow-up questions, the morbid curiosity about how exactly it had happened, about how she had survived. But William just nodded and let the subject drop, and Catherine felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The Morrison Ranch came into view as they crested a small hill, and Catherine had to admit it was a beautiful piece of property. The house was a 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch, weathered but solid-looking. Barns and outbuildings dotted the landscape, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. "It is bigger than I expected," Catherine said. "Morrison had big plans," William explained as he guided the wagon toward the house. "He just did not have the capital to see them through. But the land is good and there is plenty of water. I think I can make it work." A small cottage near the main house had smoke rising from its chimney, and as they approached, a woman emerged. She was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and dark hair streaked with gray. "Buenos dias," she called out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Rosa, this is Miss Wagner," William said as he helped Catherine down from the wagon. "She is here to measure for curtains." "Ah, wonderful," Rosa said, smiling warmly at Catherine. Her eyes briefly touched on Catherine's scars, but there was no pity in them, just acceptance. "The house needs a woman's touch. It has been empty too long." "Rosa and Miguel have been helping me get the place in order," William explained. "I do not know what I would do without them." Rosa's husband, Miguel, appeared from one of the barns, a wiry man with a weathered face and a ready smile. After quick introductions, William led Catherine into the main house. The interior was sparse but clean, with good bones as William had promised. The rooms were large and filled with light from generous windows. Catherine could see the potential here, could imagine how the place would look with proper furnishings, and those dark blue curtains she had been planning. "Let me show you around," William said, and proceeded to give her a tour of the downstairs. There was a large front room, a dining area, a kitchen that needed work, and a small office. Upstairs, the 3 bedrooms were empty except for a single bed in the largest room, which Catherine assumed was William's. She took careful measurements of each window, noting them in her book while William watched. He asked intelligent questions about fabric weight and how the curtains should hang, and Catherine found herself relaxing into the easy conversation. When they finished upstairs and returned to the main floor, Rosa appeared with glasses of cool water and fresh tortillas. "You must stay for lunch," Rosa insisted. "I made too much, and it would be a shame to waste it." Catherine glanced at William, who nodded encouragingly. "We would be honored," he said. Lunch was served at a makeshift table on the porch, and Catherine found herself enjoying the company more than she had expected. Rosa was a wonderful storyteller, regaling them with tales of her and Miguel's adventures working on various ranches throughout California. Miguel was quieter but had a dry sense of humor that made Catherine laugh more than once. "You have a beautiful laugh," William said at one point, and Catherine felt herself flush. "I do not laugh very often anymore," she admitted. "Then we will have to work on that," William said, his tone light but his eyes serious. After lunch, William drove Catherine back to her cabin. The afternoon sun was warm, and Catherine felt more content than she had in years. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. Contentment led to hope, and hope led to disappointment. But sitting next to William on the wagon, listening to him talk about his plans for the ranch, she found it hard to guard her heart as carefully as she should. "Thank you for today," William said as he helped her down in front of her cabin. "I know it was outside your usual routine." "It was nice to get out," Catherine said honestly. "Rosa and Miguel are lovely people." "They are," William agreed. "I am lucky to have found them." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Miss Wagner, I hope you do not mind me saying this, but I have enjoyed getting to know you these past weeks. You are not like anyone I have met before." Catherine's heart stuttered in her chest. "What do you mean?" "You are strong," William said simply. "Life has clearly not been easy for you, but you have not let it make you bitter. You have kept going, kept working, kept your dignity. I admire that." Catherine stared at him, shocked into silence. "Admire." He had said admire, not pity. "I do not understand," she finally managed. "Everyone pities me. You are the only person who has treated me like I am not broken." "That is because you are not broken," William said firmly. "Scarred, yes, but scars just mean you survived something that should have killed you. That is not pitiable. That is remarkable." Tears stung Catherine's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had not cried in front of anyone since the fire, and she was not about to start now. But William's words had cracked something open inside her, some locked-away place where she had hidden all her pain and loneliness. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything," William assured her. "I just wanted you to know how I see you, not as someone to pity, but as someone to admire." He tipped his hat and climbed back onto his wagon, leaving Catherine standing in front of her cabin with her heart racing and her carefully constructed walls crumbling around her. Over the next month, William became a regular presence in Catherine's life. He came by every few days, sometimes with legitimate errands related to the sewing work she was doing, sometimes with the flimsiest of excuses. He brought her fresh vegetables from Rosa's garden, helped her repair a loose board on her porch, and once spent an entire afternoon fixing her stubborn well pump when it decided to stop working. Catherine told herself it was just kindness, that William was simply a good man who helped people. But the way he looked at her, the way his face lit up when she opened her door, the way he found reasons to stay and talk long after his business was concluded, all of it suggested something more. The townspeople noticed, of course. Catherine could not walk into Yosemite anymore without encountering speculative glances and whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. Mrs. Henderson cornered her in the general store one afternoon, her face alight with curiosity. "I hear William Tucker has been spending quite a bit of time at your place," she said, her tone suggesting this was somehow scandalous. "He is a customer," Catherine replied evenly. "I am doing sewing work for him." Of course, Mrs. Henderson said, but her expression suggested she thought otherwise. "It is just unusual, that is all. A single man and a single woman spending so much time together." Catherine felt a familiar anger rise in her chest. When she had been beautiful and whole, no one had questioned Thomas Brennan's visits to her father's ranch. But now that she was scarred, any attention from a man was considered suspicious or impossible to believe. "If people have concerns about my reputation, they are welcome to discuss them with me directly," Catherine said coolly. "Though I would think after 3 years, everyone in this town would have found something more interesting to gossip about." She left before Mrs. Henderson could respond, her hands shaking with suppressed emotion. When she got home, she found William waiting on her porch, and the sight of him both thrilled and worried her. What if the gossip reached him? What if he decided that being associated with her was more trouble than it was worth? "Catherine," William said, standing as she approached. Over the past weeks they had dropped the formal titles, and hearing her name on his lips always sent a small thrill through her. "Is everything all right? You look upset." "Just town gossip," Catherine said, unlocking her door. "Nothing important." But William followed her inside, his expression concerned. "What kind of gossip?" Catherine set down her packages and turned to face him. "The kind that happens when a man pays attention to a woman like me. People find it suspicious or impossible to believe." "A woman like you," William repeated, his voice taking on an edge. "What exactly does that mean?" "You know what it means," Catherine said, gesturing to her face. "No one can believe that someone like you would have any legitimate interest in someone like me. They think you must have ulterior motives, or that I have somehow tricked you, or that you are just being charitable." William was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine felt her heart sink. She had said too much, revealed too much of her own foolish hopes. Of course he did not have that kind of interest in her. He was just being kind, and she had misread the situation entirely. "Catherine," William said finally, "I need to be honest with you about something." Here it comes, Catherine thought. The gentle letdown, the explanation that he values her friendship but nothing more, the reassurance that she is a wonderful person but not in that way. "I have been trying to take things slow," William continued, "because I did not want to scare you off. But maybe slow was the wrong approach. Maybe I need to just say what I have been thinking since the first day I walked into Henderson's store and saw you standing there." Catherine's breath caught. "What have you been thinking?" "That you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," William said, his gray-green eyes intense on hers. "That your strength and grace and talent amaze me every single day. That I want to spend every moment I can in your presence, and that I have not been this drawn to anyone in my entire life." "I am not beautiful," Catherine protested automatically. "My face, your face tells a story of survival and courage," William interrupted. "Yes, you have scars, but they do not define you, and they certainly do not make you any less attractive. If anything, they make you more so because they are proof of everything you have overcome." He took a step closer, and Catherine found she could not move, could not breathe. "I did not come to Yosemite looking for romance," William said. "I came here to start over, to build something new. But then I met you, and suddenly all my plans included you. Asking you to make curtains for my ranch was not just about curtains. It was about having a reason for you to be there, to see the place and maybe imagine yourself in it." "William," Catherine whispered, not sure what she was asking for. "I am not pitying you," William said, his voice firm but gentle. "I am not being charitable. I am telling you that I am falling in love with you, Catherine Wagner, and I would very much like to court you properly if you will let me." Catherine felt tears spill down her cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "Why?" she asked, the question torn from somewhere deep inside. "Why me? You could have anyone. You could have someone whole, someone beautiful, someone without all this baggage." "I do not want anyone else," William said simply. "I want you. The woman who holds her head high even when the world tries to make her bow. The woman who creates beautiful things with her hands. The woman who survived something terrible and came out the other side still kind, still talented, still fighting. That is the woman I want, Catherine, if you will have me." For 3 years, Catherine had lived in a world of pity and isolation, convinced that her life was effectively over, that the best she could hope for was survival. But here was William Tucker, this impossible cowboy, offering her something she had thought was lost forever. Hope, possibility, love. "I am scared," Catherine admitted. "I am scared to believe this is real. I am scared that you will realize you made a mistake. I am scared that—" William closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. His grip was warm and solid, anchoring her to this moment. "I am scared too," he said. "I am scared of messing this up, of not being good enough for you, of somehow hurting you when all I want to do is make you happy. But I think being scared together is better than being scared alone. What do you say?" Catherine looked up at him, at this man who saw her scars and called them beautiful, who looked at her brokenness and called it strength. She thought about the life she had been living, safe but empty, and the life he was offering, risky but full of possibility. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want that. I want you to court me. I want to see where this goes. I want to stop being scared." The smile that broke across William's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "I think it is more you taking a chance on me," Catherine said, but she was smiling too, a real smile that felt strange and wonderful on her face. "Then we are taking a chance on each other," William said. "That seems fair." He lifted her scarred hand to his lips and kissed it gently, and Catherine felt something in her chest that had been frozen for 3 years finally begin to thaw. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Catherine had experienced, even with Thomas. William was attentive without being overbearing, romantic without being excessive. He brought her wildflowers from the meadows around his ranch, their stems carefully wrapped in damp cloth to keep them fresh. He took her on picnics by the creek, where they would sit on a blanket and talk about everything and nothing while the water burbled past. He introduced her to his world at the ranch, showing her the cattle he was raising, the horses he was training, the improvements he was making to the land. Rosa and Miguel welcomed her like family, and Catherine found herself spending more and more time at the ranch, measuring and sowing but also just being there, part of the life William was building. The townspeople's reaction was mixed. Some seemed genuinely happy for Catherine, relieved perhaps that their pity had an expiration date. Others were skeptical, watching William with suspicious eyes as if waiting for his true motives to reveal themselves. And a few, like Mrs. Henderson, seemed almost disappointed that Catherine's tragedy was getting a happy ending. Catherine tried not to care what they thought, but it was hard to ignore the whispers. One afternoon in late September, about 2 months into their courtship, she and William were walking through town when they encountered Thomas Brennan and his wife, Sarah. Catherine had not seen Thomas since the day before her world caught fire, and the sight of him stopped her in her tracks. He looked older, more settled, with the slight softness of a man who spent his days behind a desk rather than on a horse. Sarah was pretty in a conventional way, all blonde curls and porcelain skin. "Catherine," Thomas said, his voice strained. "I heard you were seeing someone. This must be him." Thomas, Catherine replied, pleased that her voice came out steady. This is William Tucker. William, this is Thomas Brennan and his wife, Sarah. William shook Thomas's hand with a firm grip and a pleasant smile, but Catherine noticed the way his other hand stayed lightly on her back, a protective gesture that warmed her from the inside out. Tucker, Thomas said, his eyes flicking between William and Catherine. You are the one who bought the Morrison place. That is right, William confirmed. An awkward silence stretched out, and Catherine could see the guilt in Thomas's eyes. She realized that he had probably expected her to live out her days alone, a tragic figure that he could feel sorry for from a safe distance. Seeing her happy, seeing her with a man who clearly adored her, must be forcing him to confront the cowardice of his own actions. Well, Thomas said finally, I am glad you have found someone. You deserve happiness, Catherine. Thank you, Catherine said, but the words felt hollow. 3 years ago, she would have given anything to hear Thomas say he cared about her happiness. Now it meant nothing at all. Sarah had been quiet through this exchange, but now she spoke up. We should have you over for dinner sometime, she said, though her tone suggested this was an obligation rather than a genuine desire. It would be nice to get to know your young man, Catherine. That is kind of you, William said before Catherine could respond, but we are quite busy with the ranch right now. Perhaps another time. They made their excuses and moved on, and Catherine felt the tension drain from her shoulders. Thank you, she said quietly to William, for getting us out of that. I could see you did not want to be there, William replied. Was that the man you were engaged to before? Catherine nodded. She had told William the broad strokes of her history, though not all the painful details. He could not handle what I became after the fire. I do not blame him for that anymore, but I also do not need to pretend we are friends. He is a fool, William said bluntly. If he could not see past the surface to the incredible person underneath, then he did not deserve you in the first place. You are biased, Catherine said, but she was smiling. Absolutely, William agreed. I am completely, hopelessly biased in your favor, and I am not ashamed to admit it. They continued their walk through town, and Catherine realized that for the first time since the fire, she did not feel self-conscious about being seen. With William beside her, his hand occasionally brushing hers, his presence solid and reassuring, she felt less like an object of pity and more like a woman in love. Because she was in love. She had tried to guard her heart, tried to be cautious and sensible, but it was impossible. William had stormed through all her defenses with his kindness, and his honesty, and his unwavering belief in her worth. She loved the way he laughed at her jokes, the way he listened intently when she talked about her work, the way he touched her scars with gentle reverence rather than pity or disgust. That evening, as William drove her home in his wagon, Catherine decided it was time to stop being afraid. William, she said, I need to tell you something. All right, William said, glancing at her with concern. Is everything okay? Everything is wonderful, Catherine said. That is what I need to tell you. I love you. I am in love with you, and I do not want to wait any more to say it. William pulled the wagon to a stop so abruptly that Catherine nearly lost her seat. He turned to her, his gray-green eyes wide with surprise and joy. Say that again, he demanded. I love you, Catherine repeated, laughing at his expression. I have loved you for weeks, maybe since the beginning, but I was too scared to admit it. But I am not scared anymore. You have shown me that I do not have to be. I love you too, William said, his voice rough with emotion. God, Catherine, I love you so much. I have been trying to wait, to give you time, but it has been killing me not to tell you every single moment of every single day. He cupped her face in his hands, careful with her scars, and kissed her. It was Catherine's first kiss since the fire, and she had worried that it would feel wrong or that she would panic. But William's lips on hers felt like coming home, like everything in her life had been leading to this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, William rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Catherine pulled back slightly, her eyes wide. "What? Marry me?" William repeated. "I know it is fast, and I know we have only been courting for 2 months, but I do not need more time to know that you are the person I want to spend my life with. I love you, Catherine. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you at the ranch, grow old with you, have children with you if you want them. Say yes." Catherine's mind was racing. This was too fast, too sudden. People would talk, would say she had trapped him or that he had made a hasty decision he would regret. But looking into William's eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there, she realized that she did not care what people said. She wanted this. She wanted him. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." William let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way back to town. And then he was kissing her again, and Catherine was laughing and crying at the same time. Against all odds, despite everything she had lost and everything she had endured, she was getting a second chance at happiness. They decided to get married quickly and quietly, with just Rosa and Miguel as witnesses. William said he did not want a big fuss, but Catherine suspected he was trying to spare her the spectacle of a public wedding where people would stare and whisper. She loved him even more for the consideration. The ceremony took place on a beautiful October morning at the ranch, with the local minister presiding. Catherine wore a dress she had made herself, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored silk. She had hesitated over leaving her scars exposed, but William had been adamant that she should wear whatever made her happy. "You are beautiful exactly as you are," he had told her. "I do not want you hiding on our wedding day." So she had left her hair pinned up and her scars visible, and when she walked out onto the porch where William was waiting, the look on his face told her she had made the right choice. "You are stunning," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am the luckiest man alive." The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, William kissed her with such joy and enthusiasm that Rosa and Miguel applauded. Catherine felt happiness bubble up inside her, bright and effervescent, and she realized this was what life was supposed to feel like. Not just surviving, but truly living. The wedding breakfast that Rosa had prepared was delicious, and afterward, Miguel gave them a tour of the improvements he had made to the house while Catherine had been busy sewing. William had asked her input on furniture and decorating, and seeing her choices realized in their new home made everything feel real in a way it had not before. "Welcome home, Mrs. Tucker," William said as he carried her over the threshold, a tradition that made Catherine laugh and blush. "It feels strange to be called that," Catherine admitted as he set her down. "You will get used to it," William promised. "I plan to call you Mrs. Tucker as often as possible." Their first night as husband and wife was tender and awkward and wonderful. William was patient with Catherine's nervousness, with the way she tensed when he touched her scars, with her fear that he would find her repulsive once he saw all of her. But he touched her with reverence, kissing each scar, telling her she was beautiful until she almost believed it herself. "I love all of you," William whispered in the darkness. "Every single part. Do not ever doubt that." Catherine fell asleep in his arms, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had never expected to feel again. The next weeks were an adjustment as Catherine settled into her new life at the ranch. She continued her sewing work, setting up a bright workroom in one of the upstairs bedrooms, but she also threw herself into making the house a home. The dark blue curtains she had made looked perfect in every window, and she added small touches throughout the rooms: embroidered pillows, tablecloths with delicate trim, a quilt for their bed that she worked on in the evenings while William read beside her. She learned the rhythm of ranch life, the early mornings and the physical work, the satisfaction of caring for animals and land. William taught her to ride properly, patiently correcting her form until she could handle a horse with confidence. They would take long rides across the property, and William would point out his plans for future improvements, always asking her opinion, always making her feel like a true partner in this endeavor. Rosa became a dear friend, teaching Catherine to cook Mexican dishes and sharing stories of her own life. Miguel treated Catherine with a gentle respect that never crossed into pity, and their children, who lived in town, visited regularly and treated her like family. But the best part of Catherine's new life was simply being with William. They talked for hours about everything under the sun, discovered shared interests and gentle disagreements, learned each other's habits and quirks. William had a terrible singing voice but sang anyway while doing chores, which always made Catherine laugh. Catherine had a stubborn streak about doing things herself, which sometimes frustrated William but mostly amused him. "You know I am happy to help," he would say when he found her struggling with something heavy or awkward. "I know," Catherine would reply, "but I spent 3 years having to do everything myself. It is hard to remember I do not have to anymore." "Then I will just have to keep reminding you," William would say, and he would do whatever she was struggling with while she watched with a mixture of gratitude and exasperation. They made love often, and each time Catherine felt more confident, more comfortable in her own skin. William's constant reassurance that he found her desirable was slowly overriding years of believing she was repulsive. She even started to see glimpses of beauty when she looked in the mirror, not despite her scars but including them, as part of the whole person she had become. In late November, about a month after their wedding, Catherine realized she had not gotten her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just stress or the change in her routine. But when another week passed with no sign, she began to suspect the truth. Rosa noticed her distraction one afternoon while they were preserving vegetables for winter. "Are you feeling all right?" Rosa asked. "You seem pale." "I think I might be pregnant," Catherine blurted out, then immediately felt foolish for not being more certain. But Rosa's face lit up with delight. "Oh, how wonderful! Have you told William yet?" "I am not sure," Catherine said. "It is too early to really know. I do not want to get his hopes up if I am wrong." "You should see the doctor in town," Rosa advised, "just to be certain." "But I have been pregnant 5 times and I know the signs. I think you are going to be a mother, Catherine." The thought terrified and thrilled Catherine in equal measure. She had always wanted children, but that dream had died with the fire, along with so many others. The idea that she could have a child with William, seemed almost too good to be true. She went to see Dr. Morrison the next day, making an excuse to William about needing supplies from town. Dr. Morrison was a kind, elderly man who had treated Catherine's burns in the aftermath of the fire. He examined her carefully and confirmed what she had suspected. "You are definitely pregnant," he said with a smile. "Based on what you have told me, I would estimate you are about 6 weeks along." "Congratulations, Mrs. Tucker." Catherine floated home in a daze, her hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. A baby. She was going to have a baby with William. Their child would grow up on this beautiful ranch, surrounded by love and possibility, never knowing the kind of tragedy that had marked her own life. She told William that evening after dinner, unable to wait any longer. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, wrapped in a quilt against the November chill, and Catherine simply turned to him and said, "I am pregnant." William went very still. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "I saw Dr. Morrison today. He confirmed it." For a long moment, William did not move or speak, and Catherine felt a flutter of worry. Maybe he was not ready for this. Maybe it was too soon. But then he turned to her, and there were tears streaming down his face. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "We are going to have a baby," Catherine confirmed, and then William was holding her, his face buried in her hair, his shoulders shaking with emotion. "I am so happy," he said. "Catherine, I am so incredibly happy. I did not think I could be happier than I already was, but this is everything." They held each other as the sun set, and Catherine felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. This was her life now. Not the tragedy she had survived, but the joy she was living. Not the woman everyone pitied, but the woman who was loved and valued and about to become a mother. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Catherine continued her sewing work but scaled back as her belly grew, focusing instead on preparing for the baby. She made tiny clothes with careful stitches, embroidering little animals and flowers on soft cotton gowns. William built a cradle from oak, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, and Rosa contributed a beautiful woven blanket. The townspeople's attitude toward Catherine shifted noticeably once word of her pregnancy spread. The pity that had followed her for 3 years was replaced by a grudging acceptance that she had somehow managed to achieve a normal life. Some people, like Mrs. Henderson, seemed almost annoyed by this development, as if Catherine's happiness was somehow a personal affront. But others, people Catherine had not expected, reached out with genuine warmth and offers of help. "I am glad things worked out for you," Sarah Brennan said one day when she encountered Catherine in the general store. There was a wistfulness in her voice that made Catherine look at her more closely. Sarah's marriage to Thomas was apparently not the fairy tale everyone had assumed. "Thank you," Catherine said, and meant it. She no longer harbored any bitterness toward the woman who had taken her place in Thomas's life. If anything, she felt sorry for Sarah, who would never know what it was like to be loved the way William loved her. In early June, as the valley bloomed with wildflowers and the days grew long and warm, Catherine went into labor. It was hard and painful and exhausting, but William stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, telling her how strong she was and how much he loved her. "I am here," he kept saying. "I am right here with you. You can do this." And she did. After 14 hours of labor, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy with William's dark hair and her own hazel eyes. When the doctor placed the baby in her arms, Catherine looked down at his tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "He is beautiful," William said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are both so beautiful. What should we name him?" Catherine asked, unable to look away from their son. "I was thinking James," William said. "After your father, if that is all right with you." Catherine looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. William had never met her father, but he knew how much she had loved him, how much she still grieved his loss. The fact that he wanted to honor that meant everything to her. "James Tucker," Catherine said, testing the name. "I love it." They brought baby James home to the ranch 3 days later, and Catherine quickly discovered that nothing could have prepared her for the reality of motherhood. The sleepless nights, the constant feedings, the worry that she was doing everything wrong, it was overwhelming. But it was also indescribably wonderful. William was an attentive father, walking the floor with James when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, making silly faces to coax out the baby's first smiles. Rosa was a constant source of advice and support, and even Miguel, gruff and taciturn, turned soft and gentle when holding the baby. As Catherine rocked her son in the early morning hours, watching the sun rise over the ranch she now called home. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fire that had stolen everything, the years of isolation and pity. The day William Tucker had walked into Henderson's store and changed her life forever. "Your daddy saved me," she whispered to James. "Not because I needed saving, but because he saw me when no one else could. He looked at me and saw strength instead of tragedy, beauty instead of scars, possibility instead of pity." James yawned and nestled closer to her, and Catherine felt overwhelmed by love for this tiny person and for the man who had given her back her life. The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a curious, energetic toddler who kept them all on their toes. The ranch prospered under William's careful management, and Catherine's sewing business continued to thrive as word of her skill spread beyond Yosemite. When James was 2, Catherine became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after William's mother. Elizabeth had Catherine's auburn hair and William's gray-green eyes, and she was as calm and thoughtful as James was boisterous and active. The house that had once been empty and abandoned was now filled with laughter and noise and life. The dark blue curtains Catherine had made hung in every window, and children's toys were scattered across the floors. The table Rosa had once set with makeshift dishes now held proper china, and family meals were loud, chaotic affairs where everyone talked over each other, and nothing ever went according to plan. Catherine's scars faded somewhat as she aged, becoming pale silver lines rather than angry pink ridges. But more than that, she stopped seeing them as the most important thing about her appearance. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw a mother, a wife, a successful businesswoman. The scars were just part of her story, not the whole story. The town's attitude toward her had changed completely. She was no longer Catherine Wagner, the tragic fire victim. She was Catherine Tucker, William Tucker's wife, James and Elizabeth's mother, one of the most skilled seamstresses in the valley. People sought her out for advice on sewing projects and child rearing, and she found herself with more friends than she had ever had, even before the fire. Thomas Brennan moved away to Sacramento eventually, his marriage to Sarah apparently dissolving quietly. Catherine heard the news with only mild interest. That part of her life felt like it belonged to a different person entirely. On their 5th wedding anniversary, William surprised Catherine with a trip to San Francisco. Rosa and Miguel agreed to watch the children, and for 3 glorious days, Catherine and William were just a couple in love, walking through the city, eating in nice restaurants, staying in a hotel with a view of the bay. On their last night, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset over the water, William took her hand. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked. "Of course," Catherine said. "You offered to pay for my supplies and clear my debt. I thought you were either very kind or very foolish." "I was both," William admitted with a laugh. "But the moment I saw you, something just clicked into place. I looked at you and thought, that is her. That is the woman I am going to marry." "You did not," Catherine protested. "You could not have known that fast." "I did," William insisted. "Everyone in that store was treating you like you were fragile, like you might break at any moment. But you stood there with your head high, asking for what you needed, refusing to be diminished. And I just knew. I knew I had to get to know you, had to find a way into your life." "That is why you offered me the job," Catherine realized. "It was not really about the sewing at all." "Oh, I definitely needed the sewing," William said. "My clothes were falling apart, but yes, it was mostly an excuse. I am not ashamed to admit it." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, looking out at the darkening water. "You changed my life," she said quietly. "I was just existing before you, surviving day to day but not really living. You gave me back my life." "You did the same for me," William said. I came to California running from a past that did not fit anymore, looking for a fresh start. But I was just drifting, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to build something lasting. You and our children, you are everything to me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over San Francisco Bay, and Catherine felt a deep contentment settle over her. This was happiness, not the giddy excitement of new love, but the steady, enduring warmth of a partnership built on respect and trust and genuine affection. When they returned to the ranch, James and Elizabeth ran to greet them, their faces alight with joy. James, now 4 years old, launched into a detailed explanation of everything they had done while their parents were gone. Elizabeth, 2 years old and still working on her words, simply held her arms up to be picked up and snuggled. "I missed you," Catherine told them, holding Elizabeth close while William hoisted James onto his shoulders. "We missed you too," James said. "But Aunt Rosa made cookies and Uncle Miguel let me help with the horses, and we saw a deer, and there were baby rabbits in the barn." Life continued its beautiful, messy rhythm. The children grew, the ranch flourished, and Catherine and William's love deepened with each passing year. They had their disagreements, of course. William could be stubborn about asking for help, and Catherine sometimes took on too much work. But they always talked through their problems, always chose each other, always remembered that they were on the same team. When James was 7 and Elizabeth was 5, Catherine became pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the first two, and she spent much of it feeling exhausted and unwell. William worried constantly, hovering over her in a way that was equal parts endearing and annoying. "I am fine," Catherine would insist, even when she clearly was not. "You do not look fine," William would counter. "Maybe you should rest more." "I have been resting. I am not an invalid, William. I know that. I just want you and the baby to be healthy." In late autumn, Catherine went into labor early, and for several terrifying hours, it was unclear whether she or the baby would survive. But Dr. Morrison, older now but still skilled, guided her through, and Catherine gave birth to another son, smaller and more fragile than his siblings had been, but alive and fighting. They named him Samuel, and he was the quiet one of the family, content to observe while his older siblings ran wild. He had Catherine's hazel eyes and a serious expression that made him seem wise beyond his years. With 3 children, the house was even more chaotic, but Catherine would not have changed a thing. She hired a young woman from town to help with the housework and childcare, which allowed her to continue her sewing business and still have time to actually enjoy her children rather than just managing them. James showed an early aptitude for working with animals, spending hours with Miguel learning about cattle and horses. Elizabeth was artistic, always drawing or making things with whatever materials she could find. And Samuel was the reader, happiest when curled up with a book in some quiet corner. "They are all so different," William observed one evening as they watched the children play in the yard. "They get that from us," Catherine said. "You and I are very different people. It makes sense our children would be too." "We complement each other," William said, pulling her close. "You make me better." "We make each other better," Catherine corrected. The children grew and changed, and so did Catherine and William. Gray began to thread through William's dark hair, and lines appeared at the corners of his eyes. Catherine's face, scarred and unscarred alike, showed the marks of age and laughter and life well lived. On their 10th anniversary, the town threw them a party. It was a surprise, organized by Rosa, and some of the other women Catherine had become friends with over the years. The entire community turned out, filling the town hall with food and music and genuine celebration. "I cannot believe you all did this," Catherine said, overwhelmed by the turnout. You are part of this community, Mrs. Henderson said. The older woman had softened over the years, her initial skepticism replaced by grudging respect and eventually real friendship. We wanted to celebrate you and William. Thomas Brennan did not attend, having settled permanently in Sacramento, but Sarah did. She was divorced now, Catherine had heard, living with her sister and working as a schoolteacher. She approached Catherine with a tentative smile. "Congratulations," Sarah said. 10 years is quite an accomplishment." "Thank you," Catherine replied, meaning it. She held no ill will toward Sarah, who seemed sadder and more worn than when Catherine had last seen her. "I am happy for you," Sarah continued. "Truly. You found something real, something lasting. That is more than most people get." "I hope you find it too," Catherine said. And she meant that as well. As the party wore on, Catherine found herself watching William with their children, all three of them clamoring for his attention. He had Samuel on his shoulders, was holding Elizabeth's hand, and was listening intently to one of James's long, rambling stories. The love on his face was so clear, so unguarded, that Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. He looked up and caught her watching, and his whole face lit up even more. He mouthed, "I love you," across the crowded room, and Catherine mouthed it back. Later that night, after they had returned home and put the exhausted children to bed, Catherine and William sat on their porch as they had so many times before. The stars were bright overhead, and the night air was cool and sweet. 10 years, William said, taking her hand. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Catherine agreed. "Sometimes I can barely remember what my life was like before you. It is like you have always been here." "I plan to always be here," William said seriously. "With you, with our children in this place we have built together. This is my forever, Catherine." "Mine too," Catherine whispered. She thought about the woman she had been 10 years ago, broken and alone, convinced her life was over. She thought about how William had looked at her that first day in the general store, seeing past her scars to the person underneath. She thought about the words he had spoken that had changed everything. "I do not pity you. I admire you." Those words had been the key that unlocked her prison of isolation and self-doubt. They had given her permission to see herself differently, to believe that she was more than her tragedy. And everything that followed, the courtship, the marriage, the children, the life they had built, all of it had stemmed from that one moment of genuine admiration. "What are you thinking about?" William asked, noticing her quiet contemplation. "About how lucky I am," Catherine said. "About how different my life could have been if you had not walked into that store 10 years ago." "I am the lucky one," William insisted. "You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything that matters." "We gave each other everything," Catherine said, and she believed it with her whole heart. The years continued to pass, marked by milestones and memories. James grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the ranch operations as William's back began to protest the hard physical labor. Elizabeth showed remarkable artistic talent and eventually went to study in San Francisco, though she returned regularly to visit. Samuel, true to his quiet nature, became a teacher in Yosemite, educating the next generation of Valley children. Catherine and William became grandparents when James married a kind, practical young woman named Martha and had a daughter of their own. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Catherine was overwhelmed by the sense of her life coming full circle. This baby would never know the tragedy that had marked Catherine's early life. She would grow up in a world of love and safety, with a grandmother who could teach her to sew and a grandfather who would spoil her shamelessly. "What should she call us?" William asked, gazing at the baby with absolute adoration. "I think Grandma and Grandpa would be just fine," Catherine said, smiling at how quickly this tough cowboy had been reduced to mush by an infant. More grandchildren followed as the years went on. Elizabeth returned from San Francisco with a husband and eventually 3 children. Samuel married late but happily, and he and his wife had twin boys who were as rambunctious as their Uncle James had been at that age. The ranch house was always full of visiting family, of children running through the rooms that Catherine had so carefully decorated all those years ago. The dark blue curtains had been replaced multiple times, but Catherine always made new ones in the same shade, a reminder of where everything had started. As Catherine and William entered their 60s, their pace slowed but their love did not. They spent more time on their porch, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. William's hair was now completely gray, and Catherine's scars had faded to barely visible lines. They held hands like young lovers, their fingers intertwined with decades of familiarity. "Do you have any regrets?" William asked her one evening. Catherine considered the question seriously. "I regret the fire," she said. "I regret losing my parents, losing those years of my life to grief and isolation, but I do not regret anything that came after I met you. Even the hard times, the struggles, the moments of doubt, they were all part of the journey that brought us here." "I have no regrets at all," William said firmly. "Every decision I made led me to you, and that makes every single one of them right." "Even leaving Montana?" Catherine asked. "Even leaving your family, especially that," William confirmed. "I loved my father, but staying there would have meant living someone else's life. Coming here, finding you, building this life, this was always meant to be mine. Ours." They sat in comfortable silence, and Catherine reflected on how much life they had lived together. The struggles and triumphs, the births and deaths, the ordinary days that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. She had gone from being the woman everyone pitied to being someone admired, respected, and most importantly, deeply loved. When William had spoken those words all those years ago, "I do not pity you, I admire you," he had given her more than just validation. He had given her a new narrative, a new way of understanding her own story. She was not a victim. She was a survivor. She was not broken. She was strong. She was not pitiable. She was admirable. And she had spent the rest of her life living up to that admiration, building something beautiful from the ashes of her tragedy. Catherine was 72 years old when William fell ill. It started as a persistent cough that would not go away, and despite Dr. Morrison's treatments and Catherine's constant care, it worsened into pneumonia. For weeks, Catherine barely left his side, holding his hand, reading to him, reminding him of all the memories they had created together. "You have to get better," she told him one night when his breathing was particularly labored. "We still have more life to live, more grandchildren to meet, more sunsets to watch." "Catherine," William rasped, his voice weak but his eyes still bright with love. "If this is it, if this is the end, I want you to know that every day with you was a gift. You made my life worth living." "Stop talking like that," Catherine said fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "You are going to be fine. You are the strongest man I know." But William's condition continued to deteriorate, and on a quiet morning in early spring, with Catherine holding his hand and all their children gathered around, William Tucker passed away peacefully in his sleep. Catherine's grief was profound and all-consuming. For weeks, she moved through her days in a fog, barely eating, barely sleeping. The ranch felt empty without William's presence, and she could not walk through any room without being ambushed by memories. But her children rallied around her, refusing to let her sink into the kind of isolation she had experienced after the fire. They took turns staying with her, bringing the grandchildren to visit, making sure she ate and rested. And slowly, painfully, Catherine began to heal. She would never stop missing William. He had been her partner, her best friend, the love of her life. But she also knew that he would not want her to spend whatever years she had left consumed by grief. He had taught her to live, not just survive, and she owed it to his memory to keep doing that. Catherine threw herself back into her sewing, teaching her granddaughters the skills her own mother had taught her. She spent time with her children and their families, becoming a constant, loving presence in their lives. She even started writing down the stories of her life, wanting to preserve them for future generations, who would never know the woman she had been before the fire, or the man who had transformed her life. On what would have been her and William's 50th wedding anniversary, Catherine sat on the porch alone, watching the sunset over the ranch. The house was quiet, her children having given her space on this difficult day. She held a cup of coffee, made exactly the way William had always made it for her, and let herself remember. She remembered the first time she saw him in Henderson's store, the way he had looked at her without pity. She remembered their wedding day, small and perfect. She remembered the births of their children, the late nights and early mornings, the laughter and tears. She remembered the way William had touched her scars with reverence, the way he had told her she was beautiful until she believed it. She remembered 50 years of love, of partnership, of a life built together from nothing. "I miss you," she said to the empty air. "Every day I miss you, but I am so grateful for the time we had. You saved me, William, not because I needed saving, but because you saw me when no one else could. You gave me back my life, and I spent every day of it loving you." The wind rustled through the trees, and Catherine smiled through her tears. She could almost feel William beside her, his hand in hers, his voice telling her that he loved her and always would. Catherine lived another 8 years after William's death, surrounded by family and love. She was there when James's daughter got married, when Elizabeth's youngest graduated from university, when Samuel's twins opened their own ranch. She was the matriarch of a growing family, respected and admired by all who knew her. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 80, the entire community mourned. The church was packed for her funeral, filled with people whose lives she had touched in large ways and small. They remembered her skill as a seamstress, her kindness as a friend, her strength as a survivor. But mostly, they remembered the love story she had shared with William Tucker, a love that had transcended pity and circumstance to become something legendary. James, now gray-haired himself, stood to speak at the service. "My mother taught us many things," he said, his voice steady despite his grief. "She taught us to work hard, to treat people with respect, to never give up. But most importantly, she taught us about love. Not the easy kind that comes when everything is perfect, but the kind that chooses to see beauty in the broken places, strength in the scarred places, possibility in the damaged places. She and my father had that kind of love, and it transformed not just their lives but the lives of everyone around them." Elizabeth spoke next, sharing memories of her mother's creativity and humor. Samuel read a passage from one of Catherine's journals, words she had written about the day she met William, and how he had changed her life with a single act of genuine admiration. They buried Catherine next to William on a hillside overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land and the family they had built together. The headstones were simple but elegant, marking the resting place of two people who had found each other against all odds and created something beautiful. Years later, Catherine and William's great-grandchildren would play on that ranch, running through the same rooms where their ancestors had lived and loved. They would hear stories about the strong woman who had overcome tragedy and the cowboy who had seen her true worth. They would learn that love was not about pitying someone or saving them, but about admiring them for who they truly were. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the California Valley, those who knew the story would remember. They would remember the woman everyone pitied, until the cowboy said, "I do not pity you, I admire you." They would remember how those words had been the beginning of something extraordinary. And they would understand that the greatest love stories are not the ones without scars, but the ones that see the scars and find them beautiful anyway. Catherine's legacy lived on in the children she had raised, in the skills she had passed down, in the stories that were told and retold around family tables. But most of all, her legacy lived on in the lessons she and William had taught through their lives, that true love sees past the surface to the strength beneath, that admiration is more powerful than pity, and that even the most broken-seeming life can be transformed into something remarkable when someone takes the time to truly see you. The ranch prospered for generations, always staying in the family, always bearing the mark of the couple who had built it with their own hands and their unwavering love. And whenever family members faced hardship or tragedy, they would remember Catherine and William's story, finding inspiration in the knowledge that scars do not define you, that the past does not have to determine your future, and that there is always hope for those brave enough to grasp it. In the end, Catherine Wagner Tucker was not remembered as the woman who was scarred by fire or the woman everyone pitied. She was remembered as the woman who was admired, who was loved, who built an extraordinary life from the ashes of tragedy. She was remembered as someone who proved that you do not need to be perfect to be worthy of love, that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone is not "I pity you," but "I admire you." And that legacy, that lesson, that love, endured long after both Catherine and William were gone, a testament to the power of seeing people for who they truly are and loving them not in spite of their scars, but because of everything those scars represent: survival, strength, and the courage to keep living even when the world tries to make you small.